movement. So go ahead, Jason.
Okay. So again, we just walked through the 4 fields illustration, and with the 5 levels of movement leadership, the first level is L1, and we refer to this as a faithful seed sower. This is somebody who's operating effectively in fields 1 and 2 of your 4 fields illustration. They're sharing the gospel and giving people the opportunity to respond. And so again, just a faithful seed sower. As we move over to L2, what we're going to see is that God has called some men and women, some people, to be church planters. These are people who are able to effectively gather together believers, new believers, existing believers, and to form a church, a spiritual community, and help those friends go deeper in their walk with God. As we move from L2 to L3, we see this in movements, there's a significant thing that happens between L2 and L3. And so our L3 is going to be what's known as a church planting multiplier. And this is someone who has not only planted a church, but has also reproduced leaders and laborers who are going out and starting new churches. And so the gap, the jump here, and it's a significant jump, I'm going to draw a red line here on this, is that on the left side of this, L1 and L2, we're talking about spiritual addition. But as you move over to L3, you've effectively reproduced yourself as a leader, and now you've got multiplication. And in order to see a movement of the gospel, like what we see in Jesus' case with the apostles, we see this in Acts with the men and women who were walking with Paul, Timothy, there's a reproduction of leaders that leads to multiplication. These men and women are going out and they're planting churches themselves, planting new spiritual communities of followers of Christ. And so L3 is a significant jump. So you're seeing multiplication here at this point through many streams. Now the jump from there to what we'll call L4 is what's known as a movement trainer. And here the difference is that you are actually in L3, you're working primarily with your network of leaders, your streams of influence. But a movement trainer is going to be seeing multiplication in their stream, but they're also helping others. They have the gift, the call of God to be able to go and to help other leaders, sometimes in other countries, sometimes in other organizations or other churches or whatever, who are wanting to see movement, to be able to effectively start and multiply movements as well. And so this is an L4, a movement trainer. Am I still on the screen over there?
Yes.
Okay, great. And then the L5 level is what we're going to call a strategy coordinator. I apologize to all y'all there. My handwriting is pretty bad, probably tough to see. But a strategy coordinator is somebody who has basically effectively been helping others to start movements, but now, again, kind of in this, I'm sorry, actually this is supposed to be, they go to another network here. This is where they actually are looking at an area, a whole city, whole people groups, whole populations, and they're seeing the gaps. And they're going and they're beginning to try to mobilize church planters, church planting multipliers, and even movement coordinators, movement trainers to be able to reach whole entire people groups, whole entire populations with the gospel of God. And so strategy coordinator. The scriptures that go along with these, and I'm not going to take time to look at them right now, but I'll put them here on the video for you, is Acts 5:42 for the L1, Acts 2:36 through 47. And what's going on here in Acts 5, you're seeing that the people who are part of this early movement of the church are just proclaiming the gospel everywhere. In Acts 2, you see Peter, he plants the first church, the first Christian community. And then as we move along in Acts 13 and 14, this is where Paul and Barnabas are commissioned by the church in Antioch, and they are sent out to plant churches. And then later in Acts, we see that Acts 19, verses 1 through 10, Paul is in Ephesus, and he begins a training center that begins to influence, and we later understand that the whole entire Asia, or the continent of Asia, was reached through Paul's ministry at Ephesus, the lecture hall at Tyrannus. And then in L5, this is Acts 20, but really where our vision for No Place Left comes from. And it's Romans 15, 19 through 23, and this is where Paul, seeing that the gospel has not been proclaimed, says, man, I have to go and preach to these people who have not yet heard. So strategy coordinator is looking at the whole entire map and saying, where is the gospel not being proclaimed? We want to go there as well. So 2 other quick thoughts I'll share, and then we can sign off with the kind of training parties and have some discussion about this, is number 1, and this is on all the other videos you'll see with No Place Left, the 5 levels of movement leadership, is that number 1 quality for these levels is humility. Humility and prayer. That we want to be men and women of prayer and be very humble. And because the second thing that I was just going to share briefly is that this is not necessarily a vision cast for you to put in front of all your disciples, a brand new believer, and say, hey, you want to strive to be a strategy coordinator. And the numbers on some of the videos would say, if we're going to find 10,000 people who are faithful seed sowers, of those, maybe 10% would go on and be an effective church planter, just by the gifting, by the call of God in their life. And it's a humble thing, right, to acknowledge and embrace that calling. And then as we move over to the multiplication side of it, maybe it's 100 people who are a tenth of these here, who are able to effectively multiply churches. And then even less, maybe perhaps a tenth of those who are able to effectively be equipped with the emotional intelligence, the skills, the wisdom to approach a whole different stream of churches and be able to help them move to movement. And here you're really trying to fill in what's missing. You're trying to fill in what's missing in these friends' network to help them be able to see movement. And then perhaps a strategy coordinator, again, fewer still. And I think it takes humility both up and down to be able to say, hey, you know, I'm an effective, faithful seed sower, and we want to celebrate every level of leadership and proclaim, like, you know, hey, this is God's call in your life, and celebrate and platform those leaders. But we don't want an L1 to constantly be feeling like they need to be an L5. God is the only one that can do that. That takes tremendous humility. And I think you see that in Paul's life, just acknowledging, right, that he felt he was at least all the apostles, but yet God was the one who called him to be this strategy coordinator for the whole entire Mediterranean world. And so, so that's the 5 levels of movement leadership. Question, yeah.
Yeah, can you just do a little bit more of a deep dive in L4? I'm not sure I'm really connecting between 3 and 4.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah. So here,
maybe even what was asked 19 again, is that?
Yeah. Yeah. So here, L3 is you're working with your stream, your network of people. So Crossbridge has been planting churches, has been sending out missionaries, but all of a sudden you're approached by somebody with Life Church on the south side, and they say, or you know, with another church here in San Antonio, say, you know, Oak Hills comes to you and says, hey, we would love to be able to do this. And so then now you're going to a whole different network. They have their own church network, their own kind of strategy, and you're trying to help them figure out and fill in what's missing there. And so you're operating outside of your own stream of influence. And so, and again, God grants that, you know, and opens up those doors. Not all of us are called to influence other networks, but for those who are, it takes humility to step into that role, I think, and to say, you know, I'm going to set aside just me working out my church or just my network, and realizing, and I think that's why we do this in the No Place Left Network, is we realize that if God is going to reach this generation, it has to be bigger than my ministry and my church. That we need more churches, more ministries out there operating and planting and multiplying communities of followers of Christ. And so that's a great question, Sean. So.